lessons for my practice teaching, but those are just a little bit more kind of, I do my own thing. But
I've just taught a class up at OHSU that didn't have any curriculum, so that was something that I had to build, which was actually kind of fun after having methods. And it was a business writing for non-native English speakers. So that was my time for tutoring.
I'm in Japan for 4 years before this program, and I had to write really in-depth and extensive, intensive lesson plans. So when I got to methods, it was kind of no problem for me. It was actually less than what I was used to writing. I still think it's too much, but yeah, that's my experience.
Worked in a couple different settings. So I lesson planned for an elementary school ESL class, and I also did the community ESL practicum, which was a lot more rigorous in its lesson planning because elementary school lessons are only like 45 minutes and the practicum is about 2 hours.
For me, the main experience was the practicum.
I took a TEFL certificate course in Prague, and there we had to do a lot of lesson planning. It was a month-long program that I taught for 2 years, but I didn't really do much lesson planning with those lessons. The school had lessons and I just kind of adapted them on the fly. But in this program I've had to do quite a few. This program and then the summer camp I did lots of lesson planning.
For my entire teaching experience, I've had to do lots of lesson planning in this program and when I was in Peace Corps. So yeah, I've spent a lot of time lesson planning. I don't know.
This is a lesson plan design model created by Tessa Woodward and is one way to approach lesson planning or planning a course. By starting before the lesson or course and assessing what the students might need, what materials you have, and what objectives you have, you will better be able to enter into the classroom prepared to observe and adjust. It is at this point that you can make some concrete observations from the students about how they are reacting, how you are progressing as a teacher, and what notes and adjustments you might need to make. Lastly, after the lesson or course is a perfect time for reflection. It is at this point where you can determine what didn't get covered, how students' perceptions and skills have changed, how they may or may not have advanced, what worked, what didn't work, and what you can change for the next lesson or course.
Most of the time, positive for me, because I need to organize, or I'm an organizer, so for me it helps me. Negative in the sense of when you are constrained to one type of template or one type of writing lesson plan that you can't get away from, that doesn't fit you the best as a teacher, but you need to do it, like the way I needed to do it in Japan, or the way they wanted it in methods. Like, it doesn't fit me and my personality, but so that's been negative.
I think that in the classes that I've taught, I've been able to plan some pretty decent lessons and they went pretty well. But for
me, the lesson plans we did in Methods 2, 1 and 2, were the first ones I'd ever done. So they were difficult for me at first. By the time I got to Methods 2, I figured it out and it became more clear. But like you, for the class I taught, I did more lesson plan outlines. And that worked for me and my style better. But then I understood the background from it by having gone through the Methods 2 detail.
Right.
I don't need to do that so much anymore, but that worked out. I guess the positive thing to that is it really keeps me on track, at least in a general sort of way, to have at least a lesson plan outline. And a negative experience, the only negative experiences I've had from a lesson plan is when I have too many things going and I really want to get them done, so I try to do too much. Other than that, it's really useful to have it.
I mean, even negative experiences where your lesson plan doesn't work at all, and like you put in time and effort planning it and making out your outline and doing everything and nothing works. I mean, that's definitely a bummer and negative, but you still had something.
And you learn from it for the next time.
And you learn from it. And then, yeah, and actually if you have the actual lesson plan, you can look back and be like, well, what didn't work? Like, what did I do? With your knowledge, of course, with your memories, but you also have something written down.
Yeah, I haven't actually like taught without a lesson plan. I've done like tutoring without lesson plans, but I feel like I would be like completely full of anxiety if I didn't have a lesson plan going in to teach, especially like a 2-hour class. Like maybe with the elementary school kids for like 45 minutes I could wing it. Like we could do art and like write stories and like, you know, present progressive or tense or something, but like not with adults. They kind of see through that. They can tell if you're not prepared. I think I would always plan a lesson.
Okay.
I mean, I might not stick to it verbatim, but just having something there and having pre-thought about what's going to take this amount of time and how to use the time, and just having contingency plans, like so many contingency plans. I think that makes me feel safer as a teacher for sure.
I think planning lessons for methods is a lot more difficult than actually planning them for classes. For methods, I spent hours, actually not just methods, all of my classes, I spent hours and hours just poring over my lessons and how do I fit this together and what's my rationale and then
You don't do that in real life.
Yeah, I go to a class and I look at the curriculum and all of that and what they want me to do in 30 minutes I'm ready. It might take a little bit longer if I have to make materials, but yeah.
Yeah, I'm basically the same. The most time I've ever spent on writing a lesson plan was for the method sequence.
I don't like not having a lesson plan, I have to say, but it can be alright if you have a good toolkit, I think. So if you have games, like a set of games that you know can work with multiple types of grammar structures or vocabulary or things, sometimes it's easy to pull off like a 50-minute class or something like that. I don't think I could pull off longer than an hour class without planning. That would be really difficult and anxiety provoking. But yeah, it can work as long as and I think if you have, like I said, a toolkit behind you, it makes it easier.
And when pressed for time, even if I spend 5 minutes before the students come and go, okay, what are the 3 things I want to do? Then that in itself can sometimes be enough of a lesson plan that if you have some experience with it, do it for you.
Yeah.
But yeah, just coming and going, hi, it's a little rough.
Because I just generally don't really like to plan things. Like I'm very, just like to just see what happens. So that's something I need to work on for sure. But yeah, I have actually where I've just like written down just like a couple things, just like to myself, and that just helps conversation can help.
Oh, terrible. I did it a few times in Germany at the school that usually gave lesson plans, and then they sent me somewhere and were like, here's a different book. And I looked at it and was like, well, I don't have a lesson plan, so let's just maybe do this. Oh, that's a little too difficult for you. Maybe this? It's terrifying.
Yeah, I initially thought, no, I never had done that before because I'm a planner. But I did, actually, when I was volunteering at PCC, there were a couple classes that I don't know, I didn't have time to plan. And so I just went into the class with the book and was like, okay, let's do stuff. And that, yeah, it's a disaster. Like, the students look at you, like, with blank faces, and they're expecting you to, like, do something, and you're just, like, dancing or whatever. Speak English.
And they usually know.
Yeah,
they can tell.
They can tell. They're not amused, usually.
Yeah.
Here are two different examples of alternative types of lesson plan templates. The first is a running order lesson plan, which can be more or less detailed depending on personal preference and teaching style. It allows for basic planning with a nice structure and has the advantage of being a quick template that can be done in 5 to 10 minutes before class. The second example is a flowchart template. This template allows for flexibility, on-the-spot changes, and offers more variety for teachers who do not want a traditional linear style lesson plan. Not only are there different styles of templates that teachers can use, but there are also different ways of planning that deviate from the traditional structure. Instead of writing something down to start with, try imagining the lesson, maybe even with your eyes closed. Get some ideas for the directions the lesson could go and what the learners might do for each direction. Another approach is to think about the critical learning moments instead of the overall procedure of the lesson. There are moments in every lesson that are the most critical to learners. These are the short moments that make the most significant impact on learners. The opposite of this approach is to focus on the critical teaching moments. These can include critical instructions, explanations, and feedback. This type of lesson plan has a strong focus on preparation of these critical moments. Most teachers will sit down and plan a whole lesson, but some more experienced teachers only plan half a lesson. Many of these types of teachers are very good at coming up with activities on the fly and tend to focus more on skills such as reading, writing, listening, and speaking. These teachers spontaneously address language issues as they come up, where they are useful, interesting, or appropriate. What's the takeaway? This type of lesson plan focuses on 3 different questions. What do I expect my learners to find important, difficult, or hard to pick up? Where will they make mistakes? What mistakes and problems are likely? Through these questions, the teacher will list the inherent challenges that his or her students will face. Therefore, 95% of the lesson will be focusing on this challenge.
And I think that's a very personal thing. Because for me, like, I call it like the Goldilocks effect. Like, I want to find just the right amount. Like, if it's too detailed, like the ones in methods that we have to do, I think it can be really overwhelming. I see the point in trying to write out like the rationales. It's good to know, like, well, I'm doing this. Why am I doing this? And you want to ask yourself those questions. But when it's too detailed, I feel like sometimes you can get too focused on sticking to that plan instead of seeing how the class is going, and if it's not working, then, you know, moving away from it. But if you have too, for me at least, if I have too little, I get a little, I don't know, like I said, I like to organize, and I like to have a little bit more, but so for me it's like a Goldilocks, kind of just right.
I'd say that's kind of my template is a routine, ask something that generates a student-related topic that we can bounce off of, and then and also have sort of a routine close so they know what's happening. And I always wrote the agenda on the board, so it kind of became I like to build comfort into the lesson plans for the student.
And so what I ended up learning about lesson planning was that it's so organic that I kind of like threw stuff out, put stuff in, this is working, this is not working, and then at the end of the class I kind of like what did I actually do versus what I planned to do, so I redid my lesson plan in a way, and then the next time I built off of that.
I actually used the template that we used in methods just because I am a planner, and that was like just a perfect template to work with. Not as in depth usually, but yeah, I used that template in all of my lesson plans when I was in Ukraine for Peace Corps.
Usually when I do a lesson plan on my own, and I do it quickly, I make like a list, an outline, do this long, maybe a few subheadings, and then the next. And that's usually what I do.
Don't freak out so much about it. I know that's easier said than done. In methods, realize that the template they're asking you to do is for that class, and it's not what you need to stick to when you are teaching your class. I think it is important to find what you like and what's comfortable for you. So if you want a really detailed one, do a really detailed one. If you want to have one that's just like 3 points of what you want to get through, do the 3 points if it works.
I mean, I guess like my lessons that I planned in Methods 2 were nicer than the ones I planned in Methods 1. So yeah, you are learning how to be a teacher, so it's okay that your first one isn't beautiful. And the teachers will give you like helpful feedback. And yeah, it's something that I just really kind of needed to work on, that I'm still working on, is like, transitions and kind of having how to have a good like flow. Because when things are kind of just like all over the place, students have a hard time like following, and so my disorganized self kind of, I need to work on that. But yeah, so just try to make sure you have like build in like nice transitions and they like things like that when you tie it all together.
To think about more the concept, what's the goal of this lesson, and then build out from there. Kind of think about your assessment almost. What should the students take away from this, and how can I plan a lesson that will allow them to do that?
Don't be afraid to like deviate from it if you need to. If the class is going in one direction and you need to throw out your lesson plan because it's too hard, just like don't like feel so wedded or married to your lesson plan, or like depend on it so much that you can't like go with what's like actually important and happening in your classroom.
Writing notes down to yourself about what's working, what's not working, build off obviously what you need to in order to get your objectives met.
Always reflect during your lesson and after your lesson.
Yeah.